Okay, so in this video we're going to talk about word problems, applications, translating English word phrases into algebraic expressions, things such as that. So before we begin, let's work and actually determine what types of words mean different things in mathematics. So let's talk about addition first. And for addition, we're looking for things like more than, sum. But be careful, because sometimes sum can mean addition, other times it can mean equal. Added to. Of course, plus. Add. Things like that. If you see those words, that typically means that you're going to be dealing with addition. But be careful with that sum, because again, sum could also mean the answer to an addition problem. For subtraction. Subtraction, looking for less than. Difference. Subtracted from. For multiplication, you're looking for things like product, means multiply, times, twice, typically means multiply by 2. Okay, and then for division, you're looking for quotient divided by, and even ratio. Ratio means division. And then if you ever hear in a problem something say a number, but it doesn't tell you what that number is, all it's asking for is some sort of a variable. That can be X, Y, P, Q. This section is going to tell you which variable to use, but it's not always, it doesn't always have to be that way. And then is traditionally means equal. Okay, if you hear the sum of two numbers is, that traditionally is a sign for equal. So there's a few words that you may want to know as we start going through these problems. There are a couple of words that we need to be careful with, particularly with subtraction. You have the word less than and subtracted from. What these do is they actually are going to flip your order. So if I were to say 4 less than x, normally you would think that this is 4 minus x if you're just reading it, but that's not really the case. If you have less than, it's actually x minus 4. And the reason for that is if you had 3 people at your party, less than your neighbor, then you've got to know how many people the neighbor has before you can find out how many you have. So it takes knowing that second number before you can actually determine what your subtraction, what your difference is between the two. Okay. So be aware that less than and subtracted from are traditionally flipped whenever you actually write your equations. Now, I will also say this. Traditionally, whenever you read something from left to right, if the number comes first, particularly with division, that number is your numerator. So, for example, if we had 4 divided by 3, well, that's going to translate to where 4 is in the numerator, 3 is in the denominator. Okay? So let's go ahead and start working a few problems. I'll get this one done real quick. Okay, so now we're going to work a couple of questions. Now, let's identify our words that have meaning in this problem. So I'm going to get a couple of colors here, and we're going to work on it that way. Okay, so the first one, working from left to right, let's work with the number times first. Times is one of those numbers that means multiply. So I'm just going to replace that with multiply. We can determine from our list that difference means subtract. Okay, so here is a number. So we can make that number that's a variable. So we're going to replace that with x. And then we have is equal to. Okay, well, that's just an equal sign. The number. Now, we're still dealing with the same number. It doesn't say a different number. It just says the number plus, and then there's our plus. There's another key operator. So let's call that, just make a plus sign. Well, now we can actually do our translation. But there's something I want to bring up. Look, this says I'm multiplying 87 times. I'm not multiplying times a number. I'm multiplying 87 times the difference. So I'm multiplying times the actual solution to a subtraction problem. Well, that means I have to have the solution before I do the multiplication. But between multiplication and subtraction, multiplication has to come first. That's our order of operations. So I have to make this subtraction go first, and I have to do that with a parentheses. Anytime I'm multiplying times an operation, you have to use parentheses. So what this looks like is the number 87 times the difference. So I'm going to go ahead and open up those sets of parentheses, and then I'm going to have the difference between a number, and this didn't print right. This should have just been 8. So the difference between a number and 8, well, that's just going to be x minus 8. And there's the number times the difference between a number and 8 is equal, well, there's my equal to sign. Do that in our purple. The number, well, we know that the number was x, and then plus negative 42. Well, we're just going to write it exactly as we see it. Plus, and then we're just going to say that this is negative 42. Okay? Well, that makes it not bad. So we've actually done this translation, but now we can do we can actually do the solving. So going ahead and distributing in, that's going to be 87 times x. That's just 87x. And then 87 times 8. That's going to be, let's just come out here and do the long multiplication. 87 times 8. 7 times 8 is 56. 64, that's going to be 69. So 696. And guys, y'all have calculators for these things, so just plug these into the calculators. Anytime I have a plus minus, my minus wins out, so it looks like that. Well, now I can actually do my solving. Recall from the last section that anytime I want to move anything, I have to add or subtract, and I want to move my smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract my 1x here from both sides. And that's going to give me 86x minus 696 is going to equal negative 42. Well, now I can just go through the normal solving process. I have to move my number away from my variable, so I've got to do the opposite. That's addition. And again, I'm not running with a calculator, but you could. So this is just 696 minus 42. So this is going to be 4. This is 654. That's going to be 86x is equal to, my bigger number is positive, so my answer is going to be positive. It's going to be 654. And then, in order to solve this, I have to divide. So I'm going to divide by 86. which is going to cause me to cancel. And now I'm going to have to reduce this fraction. So I'm going to come up here. I've got a little more work to do. So this is that x is equal to 654 divided by 86. Okay. Now, we need to reduce this. Now, I immediately notice that everything here is even. 654 is even, 86 is even. So I'm going to go ahead and divide both of those by 2. So this is going to give me 327 over 86 divided by 2 is going to give me 43. Okay. Now, I'm going to double check this. These two should be prime, so, or at least this one should be prime. So I am finished. Okay. We'll move on to the next question. These get a little hairy. They just get a little ugly, but as long as you use your calculator and move through, you should be able to get through this arithmetic pretty easily.